Food for Thought on News Talk 760 WJR is presented by the Food Bank Council of Michigan, creating a food secure state. Here's your host, Dr. Phil Knight.
Over the past couple of shows, I've introduced some ideas and concepts that I would like to use in my opening monologue, and I wanted to unpack some of them further for you today. One of the things we talked about previously is food is not the answer to hunger. Now, I think this is simultaneously one of the dumbest statements that I've ever heard, at least in some time, but not one that is particularly devoid of insight. There are at least three things here that are present in this statement. First one is someone, whoever said this, food is not the answer to hunger, recognizes that it's a far deeper, malign problem than what is first captured. It is a multi-layered program, and there are many different problems that come to food security and bring food security along with it. The second thing that I notice is that they didn't finish the sentence. Food is not the answer to hunger, but it is a large part of the solution. And I think that's the end of the sentence that should be there. It's true, you will not solve hunger or food security without access to healthy, nutritious food. And for that, I think that really food, or solving food security, starts in the field. And we all have a farmer to thank. We all have a farmer to thank for their work and efforts on our behalf. But what this failed to realize is that hunger, that physical phenomenon, that feeling of discomfort that we get when we haven't eaten, it kidnaps our mind and it refuses to let us think about anything else. Anything. You're not thinking about anything else. Students are not thinking about their math or their history or their homework. They're thinking, if I can make it to a teacher's class in third hour, I know that she keeps a stash of oranges or protein bars, then I'm going to be okay. But here's something that really plagues my mind. Here's a first-year teacher making a whopping $36,500, spending her own money to buy food for her students. This is unacceptable to me at many different levels. I've met these teachers. I was asked to speak at the Michigan Association of Alternative Educators this past summer, and to listen to them tell me their stories about children who are having to manage and lead themselves, who are forced to get themselves up in the morning. And sometimes they do a really good job of that, and sometimes they don't do as good a job of that. And they're thinking, if I miss school first hour, if I can make it the second hour, and surely if I can get to third hour, then I know that my teacher's going to have something there for me. It just seems to me that it is an unacceptable situation. When I first accepted this position as the executive director for the Food Bank Council of Michigan, a person that I deeply respect said to me, and her tongue was firmly in her cheek when she said this, "So, you're going to end hunger in Michigan?" And I said, well, that's the job description. We're tasked with creating a food secure state. She looked at me, and now with her tongue out of her cheek, quite seriously said, "I want you to understand, Phil, that hunger is not only an access problem, but when you take on hunger, you will get poverty, structural racism, education, housing, and the financial cliff that people fall off of. You'll get all those issues for free because they're all intertwined." And she was correct. But we remain undeterred in our efforts to take on this admittedly stubborn problem of hunger and food security and how it relates to other problems in our social determinants and in our society and in our culture. But I am convinced with the right collaborative partners, the correct balance of private-public partnerships, we can go to the next level of food security for Michigan. I want to thank you for listening to Food for Thought, to me, Dr. Phil Knight, here on WJR. I'm going to be right back with my co-host, Gerry Brisson from Gleaners Community Food Bank, and our first guest, Duane Berger, who will discuss with us his ideas about this great mission. And we'll be right back.
Welcome back to Food for Thought. Once again, here's your host, Dr. Phil Knight.
Gerry Brisson is in the studio with me. So, Gerry, welcome back as a co-host for Food for Thought.
Great to be here. Great to see you. Excited to be continuing on this journey.
Thank you very much. So, our guest today is Duane Berger, who is the former Chief Operating Officer for Department of Health or Human Services. I want to say Health and Human Services because the name's changed. But Duane is out on his own. He has his own company now called Strategic Resource Solutions. And Duane, you have a very interesting concept about business solutions and how food security plays into that solution. And I want to say welcome to the show and explain this new concept that you have to us.
Thank you, Phil and Gerry. It's great to be with you this morning. It's not actually a new concept. It's kind of a best practice that was developed by the name of Fred Keller, who is the founder of Cascade Engineering over in the Grand Rapids area. Fred recognized that many employees were bringing personal life issues, barriers that they face every day into their work environment, and was having a significant impact not only on their productivity but also on their attendance. Fred, along with a gentleman named Mark Peters, he's the owner of Butterball Farms in Grand Rapids, they recognized that they had to do something to help their human capital, which is clearly an asset of the organization, that not only has a cost impact but has lost sales impact if they did not address it. And they worked to move these barriers for these folks. I think one of the first things that had to be understood is these folks truly have issues. They're not lazy. They are not trying to get out of work. They are true barriers. And that with our middle class thinking, sometimes we make the assumption that all people can solve problems. And in truth, doesn't happen. So through a lot of learning with Fred and Mark, we've shared some of these best practices across the state with others and working to help remove their barriers. What you learn real quickly is many of these people are living paycheck to paycheck. Mm-hmm. And in that process of balancing a budget, many things are fixed costs. Their rent, perhaps their transportation, their child care, their utilities. The one piece that often isn't fixed, and that's food.
Right.
So what begins to happen is if they have an emergency and they're pay to paycheck life, they have to find a way to shrink their costs. Food gets hit. And what then starts to happen, as you all know, is we have a nutrition impact. Mm-hmm. People are coming to work hungry and having difficulty being productive. So by putting this employer resource network into these organizations, it's a group of companies that come together and they hire a success coach that can either be a private individual or it could be from the Department of Health and Human Services to come on site half a day per week at least, and sometimes more, to help work with these employees right on site to identify what's getting in their way of life and coming to work.
And Duane, do you have talking with Duane Berger here, who is the owner of Strategic Resource Solutions, and about the ERN concept, the Employee Resource Network. I think I remember you telling me a story about the retention rates, and maybe this was with Fred or with Mark, they were spending just an enormous amount of money rehiring people all the time, and determined to find out that I think it was really transportation issues that was causing so many people to miss so much work. And what was the solution to that?
Well, transportation issues, and your point is right on the money, Phil, in that what companies have identified, for every person they lose, that has a cost impact to the company of $3,500 in the process of rehiring, interviewing, testings, and lost productivity and lost quality. And so it's important for them to avoid those cost loss and have these high turnover rates, which many companies experience 20+% turnover. But transportation, there's several solutions that have been put into place. It all depends on the geographic location. We've been able to find ways to get them reasonable interest loans to buy cars, of good, safe transportation cars, not bad cars. We've helped them with bus routes. We've helped them with rideshare programs. We even have some churches that have engaged using their church vans to provide shuttles for folks.
Right.
So there are numerous solutions. I mean, that's one of the things about the ERM. It's not really designed to create new solutions. It's more designed to partner with existing solutions, because there are many nonprofits out there doing outstanding work, and we don't need to replicate when we can just partner and integrate.
Exactly.
So an ERN is not designed to compete, it's designed to partner.
We're talking with Duane Berger, who is the owner and president, CEO, and probably everything else, right, Duane?
Exactly. Strategic
Resource Solutions. We're coming to the end of this segment here, Duane, but we want to hold you over and bring you back, because I know Gerry has a couple of questions for you. You're listening to Food for Thought on WJR. I'm Dr. Phil Knight with Gerry Brisson. We're talking with Duane Berger, and we'll be right back.
It's Food for Thought with Dr. Phil Knight on WJR. Get in touch with the Food Bank Council of Michigan. Visit fbcmich.org. Once again, here's Dr. Phil Knight.
And we're speaking with Duane Berger, who is the owner of Strategic Resource Solutions. Duane has spent a career in the Department of Health and Human Services and served as the Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer there, long distinguished career, and has seen a lot of need for people who are really trying to help themselves. And so, Duane, I love this concept of the Employee Resource Network. So really want to thank you for being here with us, but I know my co-host over here is chomping at the bit, and he's got some questions he wants to throw at you. So I'm going to give it over to Gerry, and Gerry, take it away.
There's no question in my mind. Everything you're saying is right on the money in terms of the challenges people have and the cost of not addressing, really, I'm going to say, relatively inexpensive challenges in order to accomplish some workplace quality improvements and cost savings and all those things. What I'm finding out in the world a little bit is people being reluctant to pay it forward. They say, if I pay this now, how can I be confident of my return on that investment in terms of where I compete in the marketplace? How is this going to help me, really improve my position, my market position? What would you say to that concern?
Gerry, I mean, that's a very good business question. And it is the piece that, how do you blend the social aspects in with the business side? And I think the first piece is the business has to recognize and understand and accept that human capital is a key function of their competitive edge. Developing a team that has some longevity to it. Many companies, as you talk to them, will openly admit that the longer they can keep a team together, the more cohesive and high-functioning that team becomes. And so to the extent that they want that competitive edge, you have to keep your turnover down. You have to retain people. We're in a climate right now where unemployment is nicely down under 5%, which we're all excited about, but it also means that hiring pool gets more scarce. And so even if you're losing people and having to go search for people, it's more difficult to find right hires today than it used to be. So you want to retain and develop. ERNs are not overly expensive. The one that I work with in the Southwest with Connexus, we charge our folks $5,000 a year to be part of that employee resource network. And if you accept the fact that every person you lose is costing $3,500 somewhere in your bottom line, we only have to save them 2 people during the year. We've been in existence a little over 3 months down here, and the ERN 7 company-wide is right now at 373% return on investment, with a 92% retention of the people that were about to lose their jobs. So it does have a very business return if companies truly understand there's a cost to losing people.
So in that interim, as you're building this employee resource network, Duane, I'm thinking that one of the resources, I know that, there's transportation. So one of the gentlemen hired a mechanic to work on the employees' vehicles, and all they did was pay for parts. He paid for the labor because he had hired the mechanic. And then as a result of that, you start to look at food insecurity in these homes because they might, depending on their living situation, depending on a life event, they might not be making enough to make ends meet. They still have more month than they do money, and this is where food resources become a part of the employee resource network.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the other piece, Phil, back to that unemployment rate the way it is, many people that are getting hired today have been in a downward spiral, their economic downward spiral, and they're coming to work with debt. And yes, they're getting a paycheck, but much of that paycheck, besides just paying the everyday living expenses, is having to go to pay off that debt. So that's even one of the things an ERN does is how do we help put people on a level playing field so they appreciate and understand the value of work, but also by putting them on that level playing field with some reasonable interest rates, because many of these people do have bad credit and as a result don't have the most favorable interest rates. So by working with financial institutions and helping mitigate the risk of the loan, we, through payroll deduction and financial budgeting courses and a few other things, we try to get people on a level playing field so they don't have to compromise their food budget.
Absolutely.
But in those scenarios where they do compromise the food budget, we work with programs that you've helped us talk about, the food clubs and even some churches that are doing some things on that and trying to help them keep that nutrition in the household. I'm sorry, Gerry, you were going to ask something.
No, it's all good and very specific. It's nice to have specific examples so we can all understand this is what this is. I want to know if you were going to say, listener, who owns a company says, dang, that's a great idea. How do I get this started? Top 3 things to do to get one started.
Top 3 things. One is you've
call Duane.
I was going to say that, Phil, but I thought that might be a little presumptuous.
No, that's right. I'll say it for you, brother.
Thank you. You've got to find a couple things. You've got to find a group of companies that might agree that this is a need, because, again, this is a business solution. It is driven by the member companies. It is not driven by me or the fiduciary that is helping, do the financial aspects of this. It has to be driven by the member companies because it has to solve the business need. If it fails to solve the business need, you ask the question about return on investment, they're going to cease to participate.
Sure.
So if you want a sustained ERN, you've got to solve business problems on a daily basis. And so you've got to find a group of companies that would like to do it. You've got to find an entity such as Connexus does here in Southwest Michigan. They recognize the importance of being the fiduciary, so they kind of help organize and run the ERN. And to that extent, they also provide the budgeting and the financial payments and so forth to do it. So you've got to find the fiduciary, you've got to find the group of companies that have it. And then you've got to form partnerships, as I mentioned earlier, with the nonprofits to make sure that you have effective, quick solutions. Because if you're going to start meeting with your success coach in the companies, you need to start solving problems ASAP, not someday.
Duane, how do our listeners find you?
They can reach me at SRS at DuaneBerger.com, or maybe an easier approach is my phone number is 517-214-5816, and be happy to help them in any way I can.
Wonderful. Excellent. That's Duane Berger, who is the owner of Strategic Resource Solutions. And he has a concept here about the Employee Resource Network. And it's really a business solution that meets some of the personal needs that a company's human capital and the people that might have. And the big impact, I think, Duane, is on the retention rate. So we've got just about a minute left here. I want to give you the last word on this, and thanks for being on the show and talking with us about it.
Thank you. I mean, you were absolutely right. Retention is critical. That's the first piece we go in, but the rest of that is an upward mobility. We try to develop all employees so they have a chance to hope for a better future and have them move up in the organizations collectively in the ERNs, something called lattice effect across companies. But it's not just keeping people on the job and sustaining that employment. It's about giving them a chance for a better future.
Love it. Thank you so much. Duane Berger, owner of Strategic Resource Solutions. You can find him at 517-214-5816. Folks, come back and be with us. We're going to be right here. Gerry, Brisson, Dr. Phil Knight on Food for Thought.
You're listening to Food for Thought with Dr. Phil Knight.
Welcome back, everyone. Dr. Phil Knight here with Gerry Brisson. You're listening to Food for Thought, and our guest right now for this segment is the Executive Director for the Michigan Association of Secondary School Principals, my friend and my co-worker, Wendy Zbed. Wendy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
So, Wendy, you and I have had this conversation a couple of times, and I thought it would be beneficial for our listeners to have this conversation on air here at WJR. And that conversation centers around the stressors and the expectations, I guess is probably a better word, for our educational and our educators to have these tremendous outcomes with all of our students, and yet so many of our students are struggling in the areas of just basic needs. And of course, in our context, we're talking about food security and hunger. And so we've had this conversation, and I'd like to have it again.
Well, I appreciate that opportunity, and you're right. You know, we have been having a lot of discussion in Lansing and statewide about what can we do to make Michigan a top 10 education state, and what does it take to, increase student achievement and success. And one of the things that really just keeps coming to the surface is poverty matters, and that if we're not going to address the basic needs of children being met, it just makes it really difficult to focus on those other issues, in terms of academic success. And children, who are food insecure are more likely to require hospitalization, have chronic health issues, experience truancy, experience tardiness, and even, have a higher rate of discipline incidences at school as well. So there's just a number of things that, certainly enter into the picture for students who definitely, have issues with just having their basic needs met in terms of, 3 meals a day.
Well, it's really encouraging to me as a person who's working in this mission of creating a food secure state that one of Michigan's most influential educational leaders, yourself, sees the severity and the potential of how we can help solve this problem. And I really appreciate that, again, from all of our conversations previously and the work that we've done together over the years, that you as an influencer in this educational system in Michigan recognize the need and the challenges that our students have.
Oh, and it goes back to my days of being, a high school teacher and a building principal. And, schools have taken on many programs and initiatives to try to address these issues in-house, whether it's having, food available for students, the increase in participation rate in breakfast programs, for example, and, having those free and reduced lunch opportunities for students during the day. And then, certainly carrying on and expanding that with Blessings in a Backpack initiatives where students are given food to take home at night and on weekends, and, then, food programs over the summer. So there's been a huge expansion on the part of schools and community agencies that partner with schools to be able to make those things happen. But I sometimes just think that people don't realize, even in, affluent or areas or districts like in Oakland County. I was principal at Rochester High School in Rochester Hills, and we had a very robust Blessings in a Backpack program to ensure that students had food at night and on weekends that needed it. So I think sometimes people make assumptions about these, food insecurities being only in urban areas or only in rural areas or what have you. But I sometimes don't think people realize how widespread it is and how important the work that you're doing really is.
So much appreciated for you to say that. I think one of the things that we find at Gleaners is a lot of people tell us, well, aren't they getting enough food through those programs that already exist? And I simply tell them, there's two things I know, and one is teachers and social workers at these schools everywhere are spending their own personal dollars to get food for kids. Every school I've been in, I hear that same story. Do you see that?
Oh, 100%. And I can tell you, as somebody who, taught high school in an area of high poverty, I mean, there was not a time where I didn't have a box of granola bars in my desk, a stack of bananas, on my desk, and routinely gone every single day. And I just don't, like I said, I just think that there is a little bit of an assumption that these needs are being met, and they just aren't. And, sometimes it's still this stigma or embarrassment, especially at the secondary school level, where students don't necessarily want to be singled out and receive services, but they need them, So they're more inclined to go to their teacher, go to their social worker and say, do you have, any money that I could get some lunch today? Or, do you have any granola bars today? And so, it's really just so essential that we have all of these services and all of these opportunities in place to be able to help students and help their families, because I mean, just think about it. If you're hungry, how productive are you in a meeting, let alone a student sitting in their desk worrying about, I haven't had food in 2 days?
And let's take that imagination one step further. It's May. School is about over. You know that your kids are getting 1 or 2 meals plus those granola bars and bananas from teacher in school in order to fulfill their nutritional needs. June is coming. How does that feel as a parent?
Right. And we talk about that all the time, within the school community is, not everybody is excited for Christmas break or for summer break or any break from school, because for many students that means food security concerns. Where am I going to get my next meal?
Yeah, it made me think entirely different when I took this position and accepted this challenge with the Food Bank Council of Michigan. It made me think entirely differently about snow days.
Right.
Because snow days happen on a Friday, snow days happen on a Monday. That's just 3 or 4 days in a row that this student who's dependent upon the goodness of these other programs doesn't have enough food to eat. And the impact for that calculates and multiplies throughout the years, because they're not growing and developing. I'm talking about their brain, not just their body, growing and developing into whom they could become, because they don't have enough access to healthy, nutritious food.
And that's such a valid point. And, that backpack not coming home with that student on a Friday may not only be impacting the food for that student, but also some younger siblings at home. It's amazing how far that food goes that comes home with that student.
She's Wendy Zbed. She is the executive director for the Michigan Association of Secondary School Principals. And Wendy, I'm just really thinking about some of your partners. And, well, first off, I have to tell everybody you're probably the hardest working educational executive across the state, because you and I are friends on Facebook, and you're everywhere somewhere every day presenting. And I'm really happy that you are so compassionate and understand this problem of food insecurity for our students in such a concise and precise way that you've talked about today.
Well, thank you for having me, and if there's anything that we can do to further this partnership, raise awareness, and get people engaged, I'm on board.
Absolutely. I know that's true. So, Wendy, what's the best way for folks to reach out to you?
Well, the Michigan Association of Secondary School Principals has a strong social media presence, so you can certainly follow us on Twitter at MASSP. We also have a Facebook page, and we also have our website, which is www.mymassp.org.
Wendy, thanks for being with us today. This is Food for Thought. I'm Dr. Phil Knight with Gerry Brisson, and we'll be right back.
It's Food for Thought with Dr. Phil Knight, presented by the Food Bank Council of Michigan. Once again, here's Dr. Phil Knight.
Gerry, I'm thinking that here is Duane Berger with his company developing this concept of an employee resource network. And I remember the first conversation I had with him when he told me that the company had hired a mechanic and he was working on the employees' transportation in their vehicles because they were missing work because their cars kept breaking down. And so that was a way to solve retention. And I said, well, okay, so what are you guys thinking about food? And he was like, oh my God, we hadn't thought about it at all. Well, now they're thinking about it, and they understand that that in a business plan is just as important as some of the other things that they've incorporated into the ERN.
Yeah, the trade-offs people make when you look at their choices in life. Okay, I got to get to work. My car better be fixed, but if that means I'm not eating, if it's already the end of the month, you've missed some meals, maybe a whole day, maybe more of food. What's your attitude at work the next day? I thought Duane did a great job talking about this is real. And the people who come to work, if you want them to work well together and be cohesive and not be arguing about silly things, I mean, let's face it, when we're hungry, we argue about silly things. When you're really hungry and you don't have a prospect for meeting that need today or maybe even tomorrow, what does that do to you? I thought Duane did a great job of saying it's critically important that if we're going to have good workforces, that those basic needs, and especially food security, is solved.
And I think some of the conversations that he and I are having, he's invited me down to Southwest Michigan to come and speak about some of the solutions that we can help there with, beginning with mobile drops from different food banks that serve this area. I think it's South Central Food Bank that would serve this particular area, but then also the concept of, and we'll talk about this in another show in more depth, but also the My Neighborhood mobile grocery.
Right. All the different ways to fill the gap. And certainly the free food that we can get and distribute is critically important. It's millions of pounds of food to hundreds of thousands of people. But we're halfway there. It means there's halfway to go, and we need creative ideas to do that. So providing low-cost food is another way to help. If we can save people 40 cents of every dollar they're spending on food now, that's a huge bonus to their monthly budget, and that's one of the creative ideas we have for helping people solve the problem for themselves.
And then, to have one of the most influential educators in the state, and that's Wendy Zbed, as the executive director for the Michigan Association of Secondary School Principals. She knows this. She's been in the classroom. She's been a principal. She's in this statewide organization, but yet she still knows that it's ridiculous to have these expectations about great outcomes for school, and yet we're not addressing the basic need of access to healthy, nutritious food for students.
And you hear the stories, but this is so well supported by research. Research on what happens to kids if they don't get enough food goes back to the 1950s and maybe even earlier, which showed absolutely conclusively that if you don't have enough food for kids, they don't do as well. There's no question about it. It's well proven.
It is. And again, in Michigan, 1 in 5 children struggle with food security. And just to not to be too academic here, but 1 in 5 children struggle with food security. That's different than struggling with hunger, because hunger is a temporary sensation and you can eat anything and that sensation of discomfort will go away. But food insecurity is really more of a state of being where this is a perpetual problem. And what is a child going to do to solve that problem for themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so what happens in households is you have kids hiding food in their bedroom. You have kids putting padlocks on a chest of drawers so they have food even though they know not everyone else in their house has food. It creates a hostile environment in the home. And it can't be said enough. When you relieve that stress from kids and parents, the impact is significantly more than that meal. And when we can get a meal for 30 or 35 cents. You're going to tell me that's not worth it? Of course it's worth it. Everybody knows it's worth it, right? That's why this can be solved. It's a cheap enough problem to solve that we can relieve the stress from kids and families.
Absolutely. Gerry, thanks for being back with me today on Food for Thought. It's great to have you as always and your insight. I'm Dr. Phil Knight, and I'm thinking about a little bit of food for thought for you as our listener. And here's my thought for today. If you're hungry, you only have one problem. You don't have 2, you don't have 3. Because of the toxic stress that occupies your mind, that kidnaps your mind, you're really not free to think about anything other than just hunger. You can't think about getting a better job. You're not thinking about health care. You're not thinking about anything that you can do to lift yourself up. If you're a student, you're not thinking about grades. You're just thinking, I've got to get to Miss Carroll's 3rd hour class because I know she's got a protein bar. If you're hungry, you only have one problem. This is Dr. Phil Knight for Gerry Brisson. Thanks for listening to Food for Thought on WJR.
Food for Thought has been presented by the Food Bank Council of Michigan, creating a food-secure state.